how to handle risk throughout your draft. How do you respond to position runs? We'll answer these questions and more, plus we'll have our middle infield preview for 2025. Mike Gianella of Baseball Prospectus joins us next on Beat the Shift. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How you doing, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Just got back from my kid's hockey game, and he scored a goal. I think, was it your nephew who was playing? Your nephew was there, right?
Yeah, my nephew's on the other team. They're not having such a great season. No.
Yeah, our team is a little bit over 500. We made the playoffs. My son's a sophomore. He's on a varsity team. Doesn't get to play all that often, but he came in, and 10 seconds after he comes in, boom, he scores the goal. So that was fun to watch. But we're back to baseball here, and we're going through our position preview. We've got a great show today. We're going to do the middle infield, and we'll do a little bit of strategy. As always, want to welcome to the show, he's been on before from Baseball Prospectus, Mike Gianella. What's going on, Mike?
Hey, not much. Just that time of year, getting ready for baseball, getting ready for all my drafts. I think everybody is pretty excited. I know, being a Mets fan and being a good company that way, it's exciting, as well for them. The first time in a long time, I'm going to the season being like, yes, I can't wait for this.
Usually it's about commiserating with our fellow Met fans.
Yeah, hoping you finish 500, but I think we have higher hopes this year.
We definitely have higher expectations this year. So let's see if we can get our big slugger Pete Alonso. Just quickly, you think he's going to the Mets again?
Probably. It just doesn't. I don't really see another like landing place for him. The only thing I worry about is, if like last year, if it's like March 1st, late February, I could see him like kind of taking a big 1 year deal somewhere, like some of the pitchers did last year, just to maybe rebuild his value, and that's where the risk is. But I think that he and the Mets figure something out.
I think it'll be a 2-year deal with a opt out in the middle, that kind of thing.
Kind of like the Bellinger deal.
Yeah, pretty
Okay.
much.
Yeah,
Like the
I think it's
Bellinger
gonna be
deal.
a 1 year, like 35 to 37 million and then that's it because I think the Mets have their eyes on Vlad Jr. So I think that's
Mm.
where it's gonna go. And I don't think it's gonna go to the Blue Jays because the Blue Jays did sign Max Scherzer today, according to John Heyman.
Yeah. Well, the Bellinger deal is a good comp. So, the agent wants to go to a comp. That is a comp from last year. They can do that. All right. Our strategy section today, we were doing rounds 1 and 2. So we're going to talk a little bit about rounds 3 and 4. And I wanted to talk about the risk aspect. So in rounds 1 and 2, you were going for high floors. You're taking guys with low risk in general. We don't care as much about the upside. We care about the floor. Question is for you, Mike. Are you trying to still stay away from risk in round 3 and 4? Are you ready to embrace big upside for players who aren't quite as expensive as first 2 rounds, but it's still round 3 and 4? What's your take?
I'm still generally trying to stay away from risk. I will say this is a very, I understand why you put it this way, but this is a very broad question. And I think some of the question has to do with the players going in these rounds. So, like in NFBC formats, when you look at draft champions this year and in those leagues, it's really a pitching question. I looked at before I came on, about 18 of the 30 players in that bucket are arms. And this is probably where I'm taking my ace. So in that specific case, I prefer to minimize risk. Like I'd rather avoid someone like Jacob DeGrom. I get it. Like he could be an ace. He could be off the charts. I'd rather take someone like George Kirby. Yes, I know he has a lower ceiling. And I think the type of risk I want to avoid in the third and fourth round is mostly tied to injury, whether it's a hitter or pitcher. And this is also a place where I'm inclined to trust the projections as well as my own instincts, because I often think the risk we think about is tied to our perceptions, like more than reality. Like if you remember last year, I remember you talking about this last year. I don't mean to dip back into the first round. Aaron Judge was very highly projected, and he got dinged a little bit because people perceived risk. They said he was injury prone. I don't think that was really borne out by like recent years with him. He had that one kind of freak injury in the outfield, and he was faded a little bit. So that's why I'm preaching to the choir here. That's why I want to kind of look more at the projections than a gut feeling of like, oh, this guy's risky. I don't trust him. I don't want him. But to answer your question, yes, I'm still probably somewhat risk averse at this point. I don't want to like take too big of a swing and come up with a zero.
Yeah, totally. In my draft champions league, I took George Kirby in the 4th round. Definitely passed that on Jacob DeGrom and all those guys. I even passed out on Chris Sale, who I think is a health risk. Ruvain, what's your take?
I think that you should have think about doing risk, but only if your team fits. I mean, if you think you have a good base after the first, second, even third rounds, in the fourth round, you can be a little bit more risky. Like if you want to take a closer, because I think you mentioned 18 pitchers, 6 of them were actually closers going in this time frame. I'm not in love with the pitchers that are going here, but the closers I wouldn't mind picking up a closer at this point. But still, it's the third, fourth round. I think you're supposed to save the risk for a little later in the draft.
Yeah, so now the question becomes what's the point where you're switching away from completely stay away from risk to then being, I would say, risk indifferent, where, okay, if he has risk, no problem. If he doesn't have risk, no problem. And then when do you switch at the end to being almost risk seeking, like I'm just looking at the upside? Like, how do you, and of course, there's no exact answer, but what is your general feel on what point in the draft you're switching gears?
So, yes, there isn't a right or wrong answer, and sometimes if somebody falls at price, like for example, I don't have my like ranks in front of me. If it is like the fifth round or the sixth round, and this won't happen, but if Jacob DeGrom is sitting there, I certainly might look at the rest of my team, and go, you know what? I'm going to take him. There's a dip here. I'm willing to take the risk, depending on the rest of my roster construction. So that's part of this question is that if you have like through the first 5 rounds a very safe team. Maybe you've got one or two guys like over projection. Maybe you might feel like, you know what? It's okay to take a little bit of a risk here to swing a little bit big, to maybe like reach for a junior Caminero. He might be a better example than DeGrom, like a round earlier than you might take him otherwise if the rest of your team doesn't have a lot of risk. But the first 6 rounds is where I want to avoid. I'm not risk averse, but I want to avoid what I call being risk heavy. I don't want a team with 2 or 3 players where it's like, ooh, if they all completely hit their 80th percentile Pacoda projections, I'm golden. I want to avoid that situation. And it's probably round 7 to 10 is where I'm maybe risk indifferent, maybe looking more like, well, I think this player is going to be like best. And I'd say in a 30 round draft, it's around 11 where I'm starting to consider players who are riskier. And it's really the latter third of the draft, maybe like round 16, 17, where I'll start sort of seeking that risk as you say it. Now, even this is fraught. And I think in deeper leagues in particular, this is where you have to be careful. In a shallow league, it's certainly okay to grab that risk knowing that the free agent pool is robust. If somebody's sent to the minors, if somebody gets hurt, like Zach Geloff to me is a great example of player in a shallow league. I'm perfectly okay, like kind of taking that risk around his ADP because if he doesn't work out, if he gets sent to the minors, I don't care. Like I can just drop him. In a deeper league where I need that player and like the free agent pool is going to be bereft, particularly early on, I'm a little bit more risk averse. I might make one pick like that. I just don't want to fill my back end out completely with players like that.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and the league size and depth matters. Yeah, obviously, if you're in a Jacob Degrom to me is way more appealing in a 10-team league than he is in a mono league. In a mono league, I don't think I'm touching him at all. But in a mix, yeah, why not? In a 10-team mixed, I'd take a gamble. Ruve?
Yeah, I think for myself, I think rounds 8 to 13, I'm probably going to take more of the risks. And I think when I'm talking about risk, I'm talking about risky hitters. I'm still not really interested in going after quote unquote risky pitchers until later. I want to have a couple pitchers that can be my workhorses that I have a little bit better or less risk. Like I don't want to take a Jacob DeGrom, but I wouldn't mind taking another pitcher who has a better track record in that time frame. Plus, if you look at the way they're coming out right now, I like those pitchers better as opposed to even in round 3 and 4. I'd probably wait a little bit longer to get that starting pitcher and probably take the risk for let's say for a starting pitcher or any pitcher, probably around 13 to 17. So I'd want to spread it out a little bit more. I don't want to have my base affected by any sort of risk, especially when it comes to pitchers.
I'll also add that I think I want to split out the type of risk. There's performance risk and health risk. I'm way more inclined to take a performance risk a little bit earlier. Especially for hitters. This guy could be good. If he's not, at least there's a base of stats, right? If you have on the pitcher side, performance risk can really crap your ERA and WHIP, right? But in terms of health risk, that I'm way more risk averse. I was just debating in my DC whether I should take Tyler Glass now in the 7th round. And I know there's upside, but if the dude healthy, he didn't even finish the year, and it was just too much risk for me. It's not the performance risk, it's the health risk, and I decided not to. I said, you know what? If it comes around the eighth, I'll take him. Of course, I was sniped. One pick before me was him, so I lost that on glass. Now I pivoted to Justin Steele, who's a lot less risky, I think. But yeah, I'm a little bit more risk averse, especially with pitchers, and especially in terms of the health risk versus performance risk. Do you agree, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all that. I think the one thing I'd add, and this ties into the health risk a little bit, the biggest thing to me, and this doesn't get talked about nearly as much, is the playing time risk. You want to have a baseline of, and this is particularly true for hitters, you want to have a baseline of plate appearances. The deeper the league, the more important this is. But I often see, someone will take a young hitter thinking, oh, he's going to make it through, he's going to get the playing time, and it's a crowded situation. He's starting in the minors, it's uncertain. Kobe Mayo might be, and he is going really late, but he's a good example of someone where I like him. I like the player, but I don't think I really necessarily want him right now because I just don't see a path for him right away. And again, this is like a deeper league, shallow league thing, but in a deeper league, I don't want to use a bench spot on somebody like that. And I think that's a piece of risk that often gets lost, which is you do want to get that volume. You do want to have players playing. Yes, you can have a spot like for someone, one spot like that on your bench, maybe two if you've got a deeper bench, but you just have to be careful not to fill your bench with too many people like that. One mistake that John Hagelin and I made in the main event last year, and it was my first time doing it, we had too many players like that, not even minor leaguers, but too many players on our bench like out of the gate who weren't playing, and it just really hampers you and cuts into your flexibility.
Yeah, it also depends on the format. In the NFBC, there's no IL slots, so
Right.
your bench spots are at a premium. So yeah, you really can't take a lot of. You have to know your format, of course, and hopefully we're at least guiding you here on this podcast to at least give you the sense of, if it's deeper, if it's shallower, which can you be a little bit more risk averse, which a little bit more risk seeking. Hopefully you've gotten some good guidelines here. Go to Ruvain first on this one. So about closers in the third and fourth round, and we've seen some years recently where it's really pushed up, and people are taking closers as early as rounds 3 and 4. I mean, I remember the olden days that you wouldn't even take a starter till rounds 3 and 4, and now it's almost acceptable. What do you think, Ruvain? Is it too early to take a closer in round 3 and 4?
No, well, round three, I think yes, but round four, I don't think there's going to be an issue because of the fact that I see about six closers that are going off the board in that time frame. If you want a closer for sure and you want to pony up for that price, there's no problem getting in the fourth round because sometimes closers are less risky than starting pitchers at the time. You know what you're gonna get with a closer. You know the certain stats. These players you're picking a Josh Hader, you're picking a Devin Williams, you're picking an Edwin Diaz. These guys get you strikeouts. These guys help ERA and whip. So they do stabilize you at a certain point because you want to build a base when you're drafting a team. The closers will give you a base. It's not going to be a huge base, but it gives you a base in the county categories as well with saves and possible strikeouts. Not that I mean, if you want Edwin Diaz, he's a unicorn, which I mentioned last time. Also, if you want to look for unicorns who can get you a whole bunch of strikeouts as well. So I'm not against going after a closer. If anything, I think I'd rather have a closer at this point than a starting pitcher because the starting pitchers, I think it's a lot harder for those starting pitchers picked in rounds 3 and 4 to actually earn back their value. I don't think the closers are going to earn back their value, but you know what you're getting when you're getting the closer. I think there's a little more knowledge of what you're getting into and how you're building your team.
Mike, I'll ask you this way. If you take an auction calculator and you run it, you'll find that the closers are worth far less than people are going for, right? To getting a third round value, we're talking a 20 something dollar slot, but closers, even the top ones, go for, the auction calculator will say 19, 18, 17. So you're losing value according to the auction calculator by doing that. But we also have the concept of a market premium where, well, everybody is paying an extra $5, $7 for saves. So I guess if everybody's doing it, if you do it too, you're not losing anything because that's what the market premium is. Do you have any thoughts to that in terms of is it a value loss? Are you okay with paying the market premium, and is third and fourth round too high for you?
Well, so there's a few concepts here. Yes, it is a market loss, so you do want to be careful. However, I'm kind of in the middle on this where Ruvain is and the market. So I don't think it's necessarily too early to take a closer in the third or fourth round. But what that does when you take a closer that early, it decreases your margin of error to like almost nothing. And this is the other thing about closers. This is the negative side. Like everything Ruvain said on the positive side is correct, but any other position, like if you think about a hitter, for example, who has a down year, the hitters like you take in the third or fourth round, the hitter's giving you something like in all 4 or 5 categories he's contributing. And so it's disappointing, but you're like, well, I'm getting like 10th or 11th round value out of this hitter. It's not destroying my team. It's a bummer. I need to make it up elsewhere. If the closer loses his job, even if he loses his job like for half the season, it's a sunk cost. And that's really to me like where the risk is here. I think you have to take closers. I'm not saying to avoid the category, but what I like to generally do is kind of look at the market and look at the league, and if my circle of trust is, let's say, like the top 12 closers, I don't know this for sure, it's probably around the seventh or eighth closer off the board that I'm going to kind of be looking and be like, okay, like I definitely want one of these closers here. I don't want to just like sit back and wait and wind up with two stiffs or two hopefuls like late in the draft. But I don't necessarily want to go that early. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just not really something I prefer to do. It's something I'll shy away from unless I really like the value. And even then, the margins to me of error there is just very thin.
So, I mean, if this is not the relief pitcher show, but just to test it out. So, circle of trust. Stop me when I'm out of your circle of trust. Clase, Diaz, Helsley, Miller, Racel Iglesias, Hader, Devin Williams. So far, circle of trust for you?
So far, yeah, so far all those
All
arms I
right.
tried.
Yep.
It's probably about 10 or 12 arms if I had to guess, but you can continue.
Okay. Well, Batista, Duran, Munoz. Are we getting
I think
closer?
we're kind of squishy where if
Okay.
one of those is my first closer, I'm a little wary.
And where are those closers going right now?
Well, I'm saying that's 7 closers deep. I mean, I just did a DC here. I'm in the middle of one, and Devin Williams went in the 4th round.
Yeah.
So I
So
guess
this is a tricky thing too. Like in NFBC, because of the nature of the overall contest, closers do go earlier. Like in both Labor and Tout Wars. Now I think this is changing because there's competitors that are across both those leagues and starting to push closers up. But I've noticed in those leagues you can wait and generally get a closer later than that. So some of this is definitely league and context dependent as well.
all right. So basically, what I'm saying is you're okay because your circle of trust is top 7, 8, or whatever it is. You're okay with paying that market premium to push it into the 4th round because that's what the market premium is, and you've defined your
Yes.
line as there. Okay, got it. All right, makes sense. Just wanted to clear
I
that
I
portion
just
of it up.
rather do it at the end of the fourth or wherever, that the bottom is than the middle or the beginning of the third if I can do that.
Well, you pick only a certain spot, though. You might
Right.
get the
That's a good point too. I mean you can get stuck, and that's the other thing too. Like so like last year in both Labor and Tout Wars, I waited, and in both leagues, like I the first closer I wound up with was kind of in the middle of the draft, and I did okay in saves, but like in both cases, it's not because the first closer I took was stellar. It was because in those leagues, like you can fab, you can trade, like you can maneuver, and I was able to kind of maneuver. It also helped that I got Suarez in Labor like really early before people were onto him, so he was a nice little buy.
But the issue is if you're drafting, let's say in positions 12, 13, 14, 15 in round 4 and you don't pick a closer, by the time it gets back to you, all that circle of trust you mentioned, they may all be completely gone. So you may actually have to push the closers up a little bit.
Yeah, or in a standalone league, you're just gonna shoot for the middle in the category as opposed to the top. I think that's the other piece. I do agree with you. It's harder to do that in a league with an overall contest component where you want to at least finish ideal in the top third in the category, if not higher.
Yeah, I mean, I passed on Devin Williams, who was the last closer in the circle of trust, and I went with George Kirby. I just couldn't pass up that value of Kirby. But yeah, it's really dependent. But that brings us to the concept of runs, and it's not limited to closers. You can go on a first base run, you can go on a steals run. What's your take on how to handle that in snake drafts in general, Mike? If you're in a closer run or if you're in a position run, what do you do? Do you then have to snag one right away? What if you just missed one? What do you do? And what if you feel that it's about to happen? Do you say, okay, I don't know if I wait any longer, this pitching run is going to really go. I better start it now. How do you handle runs in general?
So I want to take a step back and look at this from like a 10,000 like foot view in the air. So the first thing to me for this is kind of in your draft prep. Ideally, you should have, and I'm not saying you should deliberately go out of your way to do this, but when you put your ranks together, you should probably have two or three players at every position that you're ahead of the market on by a couple rounds, and that'll sort of prevent you generally from being in this position where if there's a third baseman you like better than the market, like if you're 2 rounds ahead of the market on Mark Vientos, he's probably going to be your third baseman. I mean, unless somebody is like way out ahead on him, and you should have like a backup to him as well. So that's one way that I generally get avoid being caught in those position runs, and I'm not doing that deliberately. It's more that I'm putting my ranks together and then I look at ADP after the fact. It's like, oh, like I'm ahead of ADP on these players. I know from experience, I generally will get most of those players I'm ahead of ADP on because it's just how the market works. The other thing, though, if you do to kind of answer your question, it will happen. Even if you do that, there are going to be instances where your targets are gone and the run comes. I think in the moment you have to decide where your floor is. So the example I put together, like let's say, again going back to this circle of trust, looking at ADP, Francisco Alvarez is your last acceptable catcher one. I'm not saying he's mine. I'm just using him as a hypothetical. And you look at the board, he's one of two catchers left where that's the case, and you see there's 17 picks before your next pick. You take Alvarez or the other catcher. Like you don't wait. I just don't think you can afford to do that. Like that position in particular, I think catcher, and we were talking about closer before, that's where it's more important than I think at other positions. Like at other positions, I don't necessarily mind winding up with my like top third baseman like in the 18th or 19th round. I've done it before. It's not ideal. But what that usually means is I've gotten value like elsewhere or more value elsewhere at other positions. And I'm not like, oh no, like, this 19th round third baseman is my primary first baseman. So like, oh, okay, like I'll live with him because the rest of my roster is stronger. I think this idea of positional runs is more important at those scarce positions than it is just anywhere else.
Yeah, I have a sort of a concept of that, which I once wrote about back in 2019. I called it replacement level drafting (RLD), and I sort of have a formula by position to see, okay, how many picks till your next turn, how many spots, down, assuming that there's five out. Most average teams will pick three outfielders and one for first baseman in the middle of the run, and it calculates and says, all right, which position do you absolutely need to pick right away because the drop is immense, right? It's not about the total value when you're drafting, who's the highest value. It's where is the drop going to be the lowest so that my next round pick, I can't let that guy go because it's such a deep drop. But if I, skip out in the shortstop, all right, there'll still be a shortstop remaining. My drop there won't go. And that's a good thing. And I know I'm sure some of you play fantasy football, but I remember with when a couple years ago, I'm looking at Travis Kelsey, and he was just absolutely the number one tight end. I haven't played fantasy football much this year. I don't know if that's the case, but when Kelsey was so much higher than everybody else, I picked him first round, and everybody's like, "Why are you taking a tight end the first round?" I'm like, "Just look at the value drop." So you really do have to know in the middle of the draft and take a look at every position and at every statistic. What's the value drop? What can I actually push? What can I get away? And that's how you handle runs. That tells you whether you need to start a run. That tells you if you need to stay in the run, or it tells you what to do after the run.
And I don't disagree, but this is kind of going back to what I was saying at the beginning. I think this is where you want to try to build this into your evaluations. Like, I think we're kind of saying the same thing. Like, I think you want to make sure that when you're building out a value for Kettle Marte, for example, you're like, okay, like I know statistically he's not as strong as some of these other players going, at the 2, 3 turn, but I have him here, the market has him here because it's acknowledging that strength he has relative to the rest of the position.
And I also think you should have the ADP, the active ADP for the last couple of weeks in front of you to know when there may be a run, and if there is a run, who else is going to go in this run. But also, you don't want to leave so much value on the table. Just because there's a run doesn't mean you have to continue it. Doesn't mean you have to have the next player, otherwise you're not going to get it. Because these players, if you go on a run, they don't have the same value. But if you go after a guy who is the top, still after the top value, you don't want to leave that top value on the table just because you feel like you're going to miss on something out, or miss out on a closer, or like if there's a closer run. You don't want to miss out on that closer, but you don't want to leave that good bat on the table because you don't want to just follow the crowd. You don't have to do that. You can see what fits your team best.
So I'm there's a lot of reasons on KDS to pick the middle and to try to draft in the middle. One of the reasons is to avoid the runs, or at least better secure yourself that you won't miss a run. Because if you're at the corners, if you're at the ends, it's more likely you would miss a run. Do you subscribe to that, Mike? When you do KDS, do you look to pick in the middle, look to do the end? Is this a factor for you at all?
It doesn't really matter that much to me. It matters a little bit, but I kind of look at it like, this kind of ties back to what I was saying before. Like if you're doing a value draft, I feel you'll mostly get your value. You might miss out on a player. Typically what will happen. This happened to me last year when I was at or near the end. There's a round or two in a 30 round draft where I feel like I might have to do that, but it's such a small percentage of the draft. And some of it is as the draft goes along. So, we're using the closer example before. Yes, if you're in that position and you feel you have to take a closer, you might be giving up some value elsewhere. By the time you get to like the 12th, 13th round of the draft, like the middle of the draft, there's more variability. There's more difference of opinion. There's people drafting based on their needs more. I feel like a lot of that imperative, I won't say it disappears, but it dissipates. So, yeah, it doesn't matter that much to me, like where I'm situated in a draft. I'd obviously prefer to be like in the middle or kind of maybe in the front middle, but I'm not panicking if I've got like the 13th pick in a 15-team draft.
But isn't it more common to have the run in the middle of the draft? Because if let's say you're on the turn, how many times have we seen? I mean, I haven't seen it that often, but how many times do you see people or players on who are on the turn double tap the same position and continue a run? It's usually not that common. It's usually you'll probably get if you're in the middle of the draft. I think you'll probably have a better chance of being either beginning, middle, or end of a run, or even start your own run.
It's a possibility for sure, yeah.
All right, so it's time for our middle infielders section here, where we're going through the preview. And once again, we don't look at every single middle infielder on this show. We take the ATC projections, compare it to market values, and we see which are undervalued according to ATC. And we do deep dives to see whether we believe them. And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. But before we do the ATC undervalued players, just let's get some general middle infield player pool observation. What are you seeing this year, Mike, in the middle infield position?
I what I see is second base is deep, but not top heavy. I think I can't recall the last time where like the fourth best second baseman's good, but I don't see it as a strong position at the top where it's like, ooh, this is going to be a player that I want to necessarily take in the fourth or fifth round. Shortstop is the opposite. And I know we've seen this at shortstop, but shortstop is really top heavy, but you have to kind of be careful there because it falls off quickly. And if one or two teams double tap, you could suddenly be in a position where you're not get a bad shortstop, but you could be giving up some quality there. I think looking at drafts, my third middle infielder is likely to be a second baseman. And the other thing too is I probably it's not necessarily an imperative, but I probably want to lock in a good portion of my speed in at least two of my middle infield slots, if not all three, if I can do it, just looking at how like speed shakes out throughout like the rest of the positions.
Yeah, no, I pretty much agree, and yeah, that's generally true about the middle infield in terms of the stats. Usually, you need to get some steals there, but yeah, just as you said, there's no real elite options on top of second base. I count 11 second basemen that ATC values between $11 and $16. That's a lot, and that also means that, and especially in an auction format, you there that's a big hot spot. So you don't have to push any of them. You can wait, and I'm not saying get the last, but you could wait more. Your expectation when you have any clustering is you should expect to get a discount, because if everybody's average value is somewhere in the middle, that means that there's going to be someone lower, right? The more people in a
Hmm.
hot spot, the more discounts you should expect. I remember maybe 10 years ago, where we all used to say, no, you got to overpay for second base because it's a thin position. It's actually the opposite now, and it has to do with the clustering effect. That's what I'm seeing.
And also, when you get to, let's say, the 40th ranked middle infielder, a lot of them have dual eligibility, have a lot of dual eligibility. So you have to look at that also when you're when you're putting together your roster, how you want to put it together, whether you can slide people over from here and there, and how you want to play and how you want to build your team. So that's something to watch out for in the middle infield as well. Earlier on, they're mainly just second base or just shortstop. But when you hit like around the 40th or 45th, then all of a sudden you'll see a whole bunch of players that have dual eligibility, and that's something to watch for.
Yeah, shortstop. Agree exactly with Mike. There are very good elite options at the top. It's very top heavy, and when you get down to $7, $8, there's a huge drop off after that. So you really have to finish out second, a short. More likely, your middle infielder is going to be a second baseman if you go cheaper than that. But my advice though is, do not take a $1 middle infielder. Make sure that your middle infielders are at least $7 this year because there is such a big drop off, and there's not that many available after. So you might want to clean it up a little bit earlier than you normally would. A lot of times I'm like, all right, I'll get a $1 middle infielder. I actually think this year you need to not do that. Which is more shallow, do you think, this year? And I should actually say, I'll ask it a different way, Mike. What position should get a bigger replacement level bump? Is it second, short, or third base?
I I think it's close, but looking at it, I would give second base a slightly bigger bump, and then maybe followed by short and third. But I see it as kind of tight. I don't necessarily see any of these positions having like a huge leg up on the other this year.
Yeah, I would say that the last 3 4 years, because I'm looking at how the actual replacement levels worked out. Third base was more shallow, or at least needed a bigger position bump than any of the other positions. So I actually am starting to prioritize third base ahead of second base. Now, when I say prioritize, I mean when I'm looking to play somebody, if they're second or third base, I'm going to count them as a third baseman. It's not that big a difference, so it doesn't matter all too much. But I'll slightly give the nod to third base and then to second. Shortstop would be the highest value, but yeah, I think it might be third base for me in terms of what I do mathematically.
I think third base also because if you look at the tiers in third base there this year there's actually a steep drop between what I perceive as the value there, and second base you're going after steals, you're going after stolen bases. All those guys, if you keep going down the line, that's what you're looking for, and they all have it. So whether they have a better average, whether they have a good, you're going to get the stolen bases, but third base you're getting guys who are going to go 15-15 or maybe 10-15 or maybe 20-10. You're not getting you the stolen bases, but when you drop even farther down, the values there I don't think are there in third base. I think you get more of the value in second base.
All right, before we do our first ATC undervalued player, it's time for the Injury Gurus trivia of the week.
Well, the first player we're going to discuss as undervalued is Luis Ariz. Now, we all know what Luis Ariz is usually drafted for, and that's for his high batting average. So I did a little research on batting average, and I went into Baseball Reference, and Baseball Reference has an active MLB batting average leader list. You have to have at least 3,000 plate appearances. Ariz would be number one, but he falls 142 plate appearances short, so he should be able to make it starting this coming year. But can you name the current 1 through 5 active batting average leaders?
1 through 5 active batting average leaders right now. All right, Mike, go first.
I mean, probably not. If you ask me to name like one or two, I might be able to, but
Well, go ahead.
yeah, all five. I'm just trying to think this through without cheating. Uh, Gee. And these are players who are like active now because I know
Active
sometimes.
players, because number 6 happens to be Charlie Blackman, and he's retired. So
No,
Well, that's
no,
what I
it's
was
not
wondering.
it's
Like,
not
yeah,
active.
sometimes BREF will count like
right. So
list players
these are
as had in
active.
bold.
And Luis Arias is on the list, right?
Luis
Well, he
Ariz,
just misses
he
because
doesn't
he doesn't
qualify on the
qualify.
list because
Oh.
he falls short. But
Oh.
after this year, he will qualify.
Okay. All right, go first, Mike. What's your guess?
Hmm. Uh, let's see. I'm trying to like get a guess in here before I get like buzzed out. Uh,
Every single player on this list have been all stars. If that'll give you
All right.
that's a
Can I
hint.
can I can I make a guess?
Sure, you can start.
I'll do first. I'll go Freddie Freeman.
Freddie Freeman is number 2 on the
All
list. He
right.
has a career 299 batting average.
okay. Is Vlad Jr. on the list?
No, he is not.
Okay.
I'm gonna go Jose Altuve.
Number 1 currently,
Yeah.
career batting average of 306.
Yeah. I actually knew the first two because I looked up something the other day. But yeah.
Okay, so you got 3 more. 2 of them used
Uh,
to be teammates.
and are they players? They're two teammates, and we haven't mentioned them yet.
No, they were teammates in the past.
Oh, yeah, but
they're on
I'm
separate
saying
teams
we
now.
haven't mentioned them yet as far as like,
No, no.
okay.
Freddie Freeman is teammates with one of them now.
Oh, is Mookie Betts?
Mookie Betts, number 5. His
Okay.
career average is 294.
I'll take a hint for the last one.
Okay. This guy hasn't been able to stay on the field that often recently. Multiple
Oh,
MVPs.
Multiple MVP. Oh,
oh,
Mike
gee.
Trout. Mike Trout.
Mike
Oh,
Trout is number 2,
Yeah.
also 299, and number
Once you said
3.
MVP, I knew the answer.
yeah.
Number 3 is Trey Turner at
Oh wow.
296. But just think about that. Altuve, his career batting average is 306. Luis Arraez's career batting average is 323. Just to put that in perspective. So even
Wow.
though you're getting a one-trick pony, this guy he's like the Tony Gwynn of our area. Even though you're getting that one guy, this is a guy who you can, if you draft, he's extremely undervalued. If you draft and you pair him with like a player like a Kyle Schwarber or Cal Raleigh or a Pete Alonso type who hit a lot of home runs, but they bat 220, 230, 240, 250. That's a great 1-2 punch you have right there, and you don't have to spend that much to get him. So you're not spending that much draft capital, and you don't even have to play him every week if you don't have to. If your batting average goes up and you want to play someone who steals or and you pick someone up who steals or you pick someone who hits homers or something like that, you can always slide him in and out of the lineup. So Luis Arraez I think is very valuable.
So by the way, he is a two-trick pony. I have him as a 2.2 dimensional player. His other dimension is run scored. He is a
Okay.
positive in there. But yeah, but of course the batting average is such a positive. It's
Yes.
it's like a plus three Z score, which is crazy. Mike, are you interested in Luis Arias? And I'd say the question for you is the problem with him is that he only fits certain builds. Is it a team construct for you as to whether you take him or not? Because just value wise, he's just a super value if you look at any projection versus market.
So I think it matters, but the thing is, and this is where I agree with Ravane, is that he is undervalued. Like, and yes, like you can't simply like take his projected value. I think you have to build in a bit of a discount. But even with that discount built in, he's just kind of too good. There's too much value there. So yes, you do have to be careful. Like what I was saying is that pairing him with someone like Anthony Santander, for example, is kind of a nice idea where you get the power, you kind of get some of that low average. And you build that back up and then some with a rise. The other thing I'll point out too that I think gets lost often, people look at him as a one category player. You were mentioning correctly, he's a two category player. There's a lot of second basemen who fit that description, but the categories are steals and runs as opposed to average and runs. So really it's just a question of how you want to build your team. I think people get stuck on the batting average and think, oh no, like he's not doing anything else. But that batting average really matters. Like I've had him on some teams where he's really been a difference maker as long as you construct your team, as you're saying, like correctly around him.
Yeah, we haven't had this type of guy in a while. And like Tony Gwynn, you can be sure he would have this fantastic average. Obviously, he's not going to have the numbers of Gwynn, but compared to his peers, he does. Luis Arias is the number one bargain of ATC projections compared to the market of any player, period. So I don't care if you need a discount. You can talk about, remember, like, utility players, you need a discount to roster, blah, blah, blah. It's hard to fit. I don't care. This is such a big discount that you're getting for a guy in terms of his value, and you're getting the two categories. It's just hard to pass up. Ruvain?
Yeah, I had him in GDD last year. We are all in the same league together. I actually drafted him, and I overspent on him. I spent more than I wanted to. I spent more than I thought he had value because it fit my team construct. I had Kyle Schwarber, and I wanted to pair it, and I thought it was a perfect pair, and it worked out great. I ended up winning the league, and I ended up winning in batting average. And why did I win in batting average? Because I had Luis Arraez. Yeah, he didn't have a great batting average year compared to his past years where he was flirting with 400, but still, his batting average and the amount of plate appearance he gets, and the fact that he's in the top of the lineup, and you mentioned the runs, and he's in a decent lineup. Add those little things together, it's very hard to pass up. Even though you think, oh yeah, I want to get stolen bases. Larice doesn't give me many stolen bases. He'll steal maybe 2, 3, 4, even have 5 stolen bases. He'll give you a handful of home runs also. But because he has so much volume, that volume of batting average just helps your whole team intrinsically.
And the reason that you overpaid for him was because I was in that league, and I was not going to let him go cheap. So that's why you overpaid.
Okay, and I still beat you. So yeah, okay.
I knew you were gonna say that.
Yeah.
I did finish in second. It's not like it's like it was terrible. Yeah, Ruben and I finished 1-2.
Yeah.
I was teammates with Derek Carty, of course, but yeah, we did finish 1-2.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy for you. You did beat us. I'm thrilled. All right. The next player, Luis Garcia Jr. On the Washington Nationals. You got to be careful here because there are four Luis Garcias, three in the majors and like one important one in the minors. So just be sure when you make a selection in your league that you get the right guy. Do you remember, guys, when Ryan Braun, there was this silly relief pitcher on the White Sox, and like somebody would put up Ryan Braun, White Sox pitcher for $1, and everyone would go 2, 3, 4, and after about like $8, somebody would realize, oh crap, that's the wrong Ryan Braun. You remember that?
Yeah, he was with the Royals too, I think, for a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those were fun days.
Yeah.
But anyways, Luis Garcia, he had a great year last year in 500 at bats, 18 homers, 22 steals, a fantastic 282 average. Does this guy have more in the tank? I mean, if so, he's already a bargain. And if he has upside on top of this, and if the Nationals let him run wild, I mean, this is a heck of a good buy. Do you agree, Mike?
It's funny. I like most of the players on your list. He's one of two that I'm lukewarm on, or maybe a little bit low on. And I think my big problem with him is the platoon splits. One home run against lefties. I don't think the Nationals necessarily sit him, but I think that will kind of limit his growth. Yes, he'll run, but I don't necessarily see a lot more coming in the power department. I do think he can potentially be a bargain, but he's going what about like 120, like ADP. Like he's certainly not cheap. Like he's going close or close-ish to the hitters, like the next group above him, like Jordan Westberg, Matt McClain, Marcus Semien. So I'm not as excited as you are about Garcia. Like I think he'll be fine. I just don't necessarily like him at his price.
Well, I'm not that thrilled about him, but I'm more asking if there's an upside because
Oh, there certainly is, for
yeah.
sure. I think the other thing too is I tend to shy away. I know it's not a fantasy category unless you're in Tout Wars, but lower on base projection, it's just something I tend
Right,
to shy
right.
away from too.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he to me, he's there. If he falls anymore, I don't see a need because remember, there's such a clustering of middle infielders. So I'm not like I have to take it. It's not a spot, and it's also if you're drafting, it's a spot in the draft where there's other priorities more than this. I think
Hmm.
I'm more inclined to take him in an auction than I am in a draft. Ruben?
But I'm more concerned about him having a little, regression from last year because he last year he changed his launch angle, he doubled it, and his home run output doubled. Last year he had 22 stolen bases, which was a career high on any level since he's been in the majors. He only had a total of 35 stolen bases over 4 years. So I expect the stolen bases to decline a little bit. I may even expect the home runs to go up a little bit. But when you're looking at his stats from last year, you're thinking about a guy who has a good average, will get you maybe 20 to 25 stolen bases. I don't know that's going to be there. I think you can think of him in more of maybe a 260, 270 hitter and maybe go 15-15. I think that's probably what he'll be able to do. But if you're banking on him to have 20 to 25 stolen bases like he had last year, I don't think that's in the cards.
Our next player on the list, I didn't even follow him last year, and when I'm doing some research after I saw the ATC projections come out, I'm like, huh, this looks really interesting. Why is he such a big bargain? And I'm really curious for your thoughts, Mike, on the guy, Xavier Edwards of the Marlins. He had 31 stolen bases last year and only 265 at bats. He's batting leadoff for the Marlins. He did at the end of last year and his batting average was 328. Fantastic. He has a track record in the minors of having that batting average. His contact rate is super high. It's almost like 82, 83%. Are you interested in Xavier Edwards? Because I don't know why he's going that low. Is it because he's got no homers and RBIs at all, so he's also essentially a two category guy. His dimension is 2.1, which is really really short.
Yeah, I'm okay with him at price. Like he's not somebody I'd necessarily be targeting, but I do see kind of where he's going, and I think he's going like kind of close to maybe a little bit over like pick 200, and I'm trying to find him now, but
He's actually going a little bit
yeah,
higher. He's going at
well, he's
one
going a
one
little bit
fifty.
higher than that.
Yeah,
So I
157.
mean, maybe
155.
he's going a little bit higher than I'd like, but like that being said, like I don't think he's necessarily a reach there. There's like a couple things that I don't like about him though, and he's like kind of a lean against for me. Like I think I'd take him in some circumstances, but one is what you just said, which is almost all of it steals, and if that slips a little bit or if the average drops a little bit, like his expected average, and yes, I know for speedy players, like it doesn't always like translate, but his expected average last year was about 250. That tells a very different story. And I think the other thing I really don't like the team context here. Yes, he could score a lot of runs, but I look at that lineup and I'm like, yeah, I could also see it really going sideways for the Marlins, where they're one of the worst offenses in baseball, and then he is just a stolen base
Yeah.
guy no matter what he does. So I think you have to be careful with players like this. You talked about this with the rise in your build. If you take Edwards and you're banking on like 35, 40 steals, and he does nothing else, you have to be careful. And the other thing too is you can find players, unlike a rise, you can't find a batting average king like on the waiver wire. You can find players like this in season. They always come through. I remember last year, I picked up Victor Robles in a couple places. He was like free. You can kind of piece your steals together. So I'm okay with Edwards. I wouldn't say he's not on my do not draft list, but he's also not a target for me either, even at
No.
his price.
Yeah, that's good analysis, and I call this profile risk or categorical risk. It's if you calculate the overall values you can get to, it can be a bargain, but if there's underperformance or injury or no performance, because they're sort of out of whack and it's all concentrated in one category, it has a disproportionate effect of his absence on the rest of your squad. Suddenly, you're at a big hole in steals, right? It's trickier to roster these guys. They do have to be drafted a little bit lower for that. And when I do my risk adjusted prices, I do take off for this low dimensional ability. Ruben?
Well, I'm actually very high on him. He's one of the guys I picked up in GDD midseason and helped me rocket to the top of stolen bases. Now, if you look at his batting average, in the minors he has not had, and in the majors he has not batted under 300 except for a 90 game stretch with Tampa in 2022. Tampa actually traded for him when he was in the minors, so if Tampa Bay likes him, there's something there going on. Then, if you look at this past year, he batted toward the bottom of the batting order until July 27th. From then on, he was switched to leadoff, where he had 28 stolen bases and only getting caught 3 times. So he's getting on base. He has a good batting. He has a history of a good batting average, and they're telling him to run. So he's a guy that he's actually one of my targets. I actually like him a lot. If you lose on him, that's fine. You know what? His batting average, you lose the batting average, okay, fine. If he regresses a little bit and he bats 270, 280, I'll take that if he still steals 20 to 30 bases. But if you lose out on those stolen bases is something you can still pick up on the waiver wire, and this is still the area. If he's going in the 150s, that's around round 10. I have no problem taking a risk on a player like this in round 10. If he was earlier on, I wouldn't, and if he falls to around 12, 13, I'm grabbing him up in a second.
So, Mike, would you prefer a player such as Jeremy Pena, who is pretty much a similar value, but pretty much the opposite? He is a 4.5 dimensional player, spread really well, and projections are all together, so he's got a low volatility metric. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
I definitely prefer Pena. This is I generally don't like to take a steals player unless, he's going like closer to pick 200 or maybe a little bit before that. Or if it's someone, I don't know if he'll be healthy yet, but assuming like a healthy Nico Horner, where I know there's some batting average built in and it's something he's done like over the course of like 2 or 3 seasons. And I'm not commenting on Horner's health. I'm more commenting on like past Nico Horner.
I will
But
later. I will later.
yeah, yeah, but the whole thing there is that Jeremy Pena, I just kind of like that he's got all around stats. He's a 5 category player. He's entering his age 27 season. I don't know what the shape of his contributions will look like. So maybe he steals 13 or 14 instead of stealing like 20 like he did last year. Maybe he hits 15 home runs like he did last year instead of popping up to close to 20, which I see in some of the models. But yeah, I see an all around player, and he looks like a slight batting average positive too. So yeah, I definitely prefer Pena. He's kind of my kind of player I like to get in this price range.
You agree, Ruben?
I do agree, and I think if he changes his launch angle just a little bit, he can change that home run to fly ball rate that he had last year. He was only 9% last year. So if he does that, he's entering, like you mentioned, age 27. This is the year 27, 28, 29 when the players start to really grow into their power numbers. And the fact that he's probably going to be batting higher up in the lineup, if Alex Bregman's not there, he'll bat higher in the lineup, and he may get more opportunities. And he may, if he fixes that one thing, gets a little more home run, a little higher home run to fly ball rate, you may get a higher expected home run total from him.
And from volatility, he's also positive skew, so he's a triple risk metric guy. Just got ATC loves him, and his risk adjusted price only goes up, so he's worth even more on a risk adjusted basis. I think he's great. Let's go to Ruvain first on this one. Zach Neto of the Angels. He was, almost 25-30 last year. Is that an aberration? Because if it wasn't, this is a heck of a steal of this guy.
Well, last podcast, I think it was who do we have last podcast who mentioned the Ron Washington effect? I think this is the Ron Washington effect again, because his 30 stolen bases basically came out of nowhere. I don't know where it came from, but what I'm more concerned is that he hurt his shoulder the last week of the season, and he had shoulder surgery in November. They didn't say what type of surgery it was, so we don't know how long he'll be out for. But a shoulder surgery recovery period can be anywhere between 4 to 6 months, depending on severity and depending on what they did. So if that shoulder injury lasts for the 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, you may see a zap in his power a little bit. You still can get the stolen bases, but you make sure that when you do draft him, you are taking that possible time discount that he could miss possibly the first or second month of the season. So I'm a little bit lower on him, and I'd probably lower his value a little bit.
I'm glad I went to you first for that injury update there.
Yes.
Yeah, Mike, what do you think? Is the injury a big issue? But otherwise, what do you think?
It is, but I will say, and again, this is format dependent. Like he's a rough player to roster in an NFBC like type format with no IL slots because
Right.
if I'm gonna keep somebody like that for say, let's average that out and say like he's out for 6 weeks. I want that to be like an elite top of the pops hitters. So if you're telling me, for example, that Ronald Acuna Jr. is going to be out for 6 weeks, I'll hold on to him because he's Ronald Acuna Jr. And yes, there's risk, but I know the ceiling. Whereas with Neto, it's like that's a tough guy to hold. Now, in a league where you can stash him on the IL at the price he's going, he's still like, and I kind of game this out and like lopped off like those 6 weeks of stats. He's still a bargain. Like, and I think that's where your projection kind of has him in terms of plate appearances, where it's lopping off about like 4 to 6 weeks.
Right.
I still like him. Like, there's still like plenty of circumstances I'll take him. And this is tough too because it's sort of a balance where deep mix is probably the sweet spot. Like in only, it's a little more difficult because you're going to have like a zero there for 6 weeks. You want to have something in there to replace him, like even if it's a low level like starter. Yeah, so that's where I'm targeting him. Leagues with an IL, a league like Labor Mixed or Tout Mixed, where I can put somebody in there and then get the benefit of hopefully 4.5 months.
Yeah, that's a good point. In an IL league, I'd actually argue he's worth more because not only are you
Yeah,
getting the value with the limited at bats that I'm already projecting, you're also getting the replacement value, and you're getting that guy on top of it to fill in, right? So in an IL league, he's a way bigger bargain. You're getting much more. NFBC, you need a bigger discount. By the way, I just want to ask you theoretically, like, what kind of discount are you looking for? Because obviously Zach Nato is going to be rostered on some team, right? I mean, you'd pick him up in your 23rd round, obviously, right? So he's going to
yeah.
be on somebody's bench. Obviously, you don't want to pay his full value because he's going to be on your bench. Like what kind of discount are you looking for in general to roster a guy who's going to sit on your bench for a month and a half?
You're probably looking like in a league with an IL, you're probably looking at like a 20 to 25% discount. I think you have to cut into it. And the other thing too is you don't want to go too far with this, but you do want to keep that worst case scenario in mind where you're like, well, it could be 8 weeks, as Ruvain pointed out, and you don't want to think, oh, be optimistic, oh, he'll be back in 4 weeks, and then sit there for a month with nothing. So I'm probably cutting his price more on the conservative side, like down to those 8 weeks. But again, even so, I still like see a bargain here based off of his ADP.
All right, back to you, Mike. Bryson Stott. I was high on him last year because I wanted 30 steals, and he did get 30 steals, although it came with a crappy 245 average, and the power just never stuck. Do we think that Stott is closer to 2023, where he was a $17 player, or is he $11 player like he was last year? My projections are cutting him in the middle as a $13 player. You're getting a bargain for him either way, but what do you think? Is he more this past year or back to when his glory days of 23?
I see it as your projection does. I'm kind of,
Yeah.
and I did this before I even saw the projections of the ADP. I'm kind of splitting it down the middle. So what I see is a player who, not necessarily a target, probably the opposite of Edwards, where I'm neutral, but it's a lean toward where I could easily see like taking him right at ADP and feel like, oh, I'm getting a bit of a bargain here. Good lineup. Like I really like the context. I really like the park. I don't necessarily believe in the power, but I think in that park, it could boost him a little bit in terms of the home runs. He's not certainly not a fly ball hitter, but he's also probably more of a neutral hitter, and I think that helps him out a little bit there as well. Even though the batted ball metrics are just kind of eh.
I agree.
His launch angle did go last year from 10 to 14, so he is trying to hit it in the air more. And he did walk more last year. His walk rate was up also. So he's more of a similar type of a Jerry Payne type player who I think you may get a surprise in the home run category. Stolen bases, it's a matter of, it's lineup context, what's going, where he's going to bat in the lineup 100%. You don't know where he's going to bat 100%. If they put him higher up, they put him lower down, and how much of a green light they're going to give him with the lineup looks below him as well. So there's a lot of context in coming in with the stolen bases, but he's had 30 plus stolen bases and 10 to 15 home runs the last 2 years. I think you can definitely say in the middle, like RL, you said. I think he'll a $13 value. That's perfect for him.
Glaber Torres. Now, he's not the player that he was a couple years ago when he would hit like 25 homers and almost 15 steals and hit 270. That was amazing. Last year, struggled. But he did come up with 15 homers, 4 steals, 257 average, and a lot of runs. He was a $10 player last year. I'm projecting him pretty much to be the same guy he was last year. Um, and it's a huge bargain because he's going in round 15. Now, I don't exactly believe that because Yankee Stadium is different than the Tiger Stadium. What's Tiger Stadium called now?
Is it Comerica?
Comerica?
Yeah,
Yeah,
probably still
Comerica.
I
Comerica.
think so,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, I thought so. So I think the projections are a little bit optimistic. But he is very well categorically spread, and he does have a very positive skew. So there is the upside in there. I don't know. Is Torres an option for you? I mean, I think if he drops 2 rounds after ADP, he's definitely an option for me.
Yeah, so there's a couple things about Torres. He's a price guy for me for sure. Like I like him at this price. Now I will say, if you look at his, and I only noticed this because I I won a league last year because that Yankee game that ended at the end, I was rooting against Torres stealing a base, and I thought, oh, he could steal a base. And what I noticed is he pretty much stopped running, and I think his last stolen base, and I'm looking up now, yeah, it was May 15th. So I do have that concern with him. I know what the projections are saying, but there's a possibility based on the player he is that you could get a zero or close to a zero from him. Like I know he has the ability, but if he's decided, you know what, I'm not really running anymore, it's just not something I'm going to do. I think that cuts into his value a little bit. And then this is kind of the build thing. It's sort of almost like a healthy, and he's not as talented, but it's sort of like a healthy Carlos Correa, where it's like, okay, if I'm taking a player who's not going to steal or maybe like steal a couple of bases for me, it all has to work, right? Like you really need him to kind of get to the top of those projections, like close to 20 home runs, like close to 80 runs, close to 70 runs batted in, with maybe like a 260 average. So I like him, but I also think that's just the one thing I'm a little bit wary about is I don't see him running that much.
Ruvain, I think this is an injury question for you because he was hit on his right thumb very early on in the year or before the season, and that hampered him. And then he had a groin issue, which had to be the reason he didn't steal anything, right? And of course, if that's all healed, then I'm not saying he goes back to what he was before, but I mean, he's got to be better than last year, right? What do you think?
I think the injury played into it in the first part of the season where he was batting in the lineup, and I think this is a conspiracy theory for me because remember I forgot which player said that the Yankees are a two player team that's just Judge and Soto, and there was nobody else. Well, if you think about it, Gleyber Torres started batting leadoff in August. If you're batting leadoff and you get on base and you try to steal a base, then if one of those guys get walked, one of them get out, then the other one gets walked, and you're taking the bat out of their hand. So he may have been told not to run the second half of the season completely, which is why he only attempted 7 stolen bases the entire year. Because if you think of that lineup, he batted fifth. Who batted? I can't think of who batted after him. Who batted after him? Was it DJ LeMahieu at the beginning of the year? I mean, I don't even know who batted after Gleyber Torres because that lineup was I don't know who made the lineup, but Gleyber Torres started off the year batting fifth, and then they moved him to the leadoff spot. But once they got the leadoff spot, I think they told him not to run just because they wanted him to stay on base and they wanted Judge and Soto to be up with players on base. Now he's going to a new situation. He's in Detroit. Detroit tends to run more, so I think you may see a bump in his stolen bases as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I think it was. Yeah, you're right. You might be right, but the lineup and partially injury related as well. Tyler Fitzgerald. Now, he is currently only shortstop eligible, but he will gain second base eligibility as the Giants have signed Willie Adames, so he'll move to second base when he plays, and he'll pick it up quickly. By the way, just to let you know what I do mathematically if for players that have the eligibility now, but are going to gain the eligibility is I list them for myself at the position that they are going to be eligible as well. And in terms of replacement level, I count them at their better position or the more scarce one as if they are eligible because that's where they're really going to end up in value. But I'll make a denotion with like a star that okay, second base shortstop, a second base star that he technically doesn't qualify there yet. So a memo to myself on what he really is qualified now, but mathematically, I put him in as if he fully qualifies at that position. Anyways, Tyler Fitzgerald, 15 homers, 17 steals last year, 280 average, and only 314 at bats. ATC has him as close to a 2020 player, and you're getting a 2020 player in the 17th round. Now, his average is going to go way down. He had a 380 BABIP, but this could still be an interesting little small value late if you need a shortstop. Do you agree, Mike?
I think he's okay. I mean, I think he could be a value, and he could kind of hold off. Like something that I always worry about with players like this. This was and yes, I know he was hurt last year, but this is sort of the Tyro Estrada effect, where it's that one neat trick, and Fitzgerald kind of has that one neat trick where he was maximizing what he was doing in terms of his batted ball and in terms of fly balls and in terms of taking advantage of the park. I've seen that go wrong with players, and like his expected stats last year were so out of whack with what he actually did that does concern me a little bit with the power. Also, the strikeout rate is high. It's not super high, but I could see pitchers kind of exposing him his first full season through. So could he do 2020? He certainly could. I just see enough downside here. Not that I don't want him, but more that I think the price is fair and kind of reflecting that potential downside as opposed to like, oh, he's definitely going to be a 2020 guy.
All right, move in.
I think there's going to be some upside here. I'm going to disagree a little bit because if you look what he did in the minors in 2022 and 2023, he hit a total in those 2 years of 43 home runs and stole 52 bases. So if you do that and see what he did last year, 15 homers and 17 stolen bases for the time he was up, that's not completely out of whack of his prior history of what he's done. But I don't think anybody knows exactly where to place him because he's going right now around pick 230 in the mid 230s, something like that. But if you look, when I looked this up, his minimum pick, do the min and max. The minimum was 140, and the last pick was 363. So it seems like nobody's really sure where to place him. So this is a guy you can maybe wait and sneak him in later, and he may be a nice surprise for you.
My big issue with him is the strikeout rate. He had a 32% strikeout rate last year, and I always worry that that can turn into a really bad batting average, and that would lose playing time. I mean, I'm only projecting a 242 average, 40 points lower than what he did last year, and they're a downside. And anytime you have that kind of downside with those kinds of guys, they could lose playing time in a hurry. So that's my only wart on him. But for the price, yeah, if he lasts to the 20th round and I need a middle infielder, yeah, I mean he just contributes a little bit of everything, and at that price you can throw him away, right? If he fails, so I think it's a good buy. I think it's a good buy, roughly around or just after ADP. All right, last player to do. According to Roster Resource, he is the cleanup hitter on the Cardinals. What? Brendan Donovan, second base, outfield eligible. That's right, cleanup. But he does have a good batting average. He batted 278 last year, and it's not a fluke. He had an 88% contact rate. That's pretty good. BABIP luck neutral, so it's legit. He is, again, a pretty decently spread out category guy. I have him projected 13 homers, 6 steals. Good amount of runs and RBI. That's because he's going to be in the middle of the lineup. So I feel like Brendan Donovan, his value comes a lot from his run production. As long as he stays in the middle of the lineup, he would. But will he stay in the middle of the lineup? So that's the question. Mike, what do you think?
I don't know. So this is my thing about Donovan. Donovan to me is kind of the opposite of some of these guys we're talking about. He is a deep league special. I love players like this in NL only and deeper mixed leagues because he plays every day. He's kind of underrated. He does a little bit of everything. In a standard mixed league, I really want a lot more upside than this. Like he's somebody, yes, he's going to play every day and he's going to be consistent, but we're just talking about Fitzgerald. Give me Fitzgerald over Donovan, and I can find somebody like Donovan like on the wire. I also look at the Cardinals. I think at some point, Thomas Sagasi is going to be pushing for playing time a little bit. I can see Donovan more of a super utility role. He's not completely lose like his plate appearances. He's too talented, but if you look at the projection, if you look at what he did last year, he was a 14.5 last year. You've got him, I think, as like a 13.6. It's kind of where all the models sort of have him. I wish he ran more. Like if he was like a 15-10, 15-12, I think I'd be a little more excited as opposed to like the 5 to 7 steals I see him projected at.
Yeah, good point. In a mono league, this is good value because you're getting pretty much at bats, and it's also always about at bats, right? So
Yeah.
you're getting that from him. You're getting the steady Eddie, and it's at a discount, sure. In a mixed league, though, no upside. It's cheap, yes, but you're not getting the upside. But I still think he's a help because the batting average is a plus. So if you're in a 15-team mixed, that batting average that comes all the way, you're getting him in like the 18th round. That's a plus, and it's hard to find those plus guys. And he's position flexible. Second outfield is pretty good dual eligibility. So I think he's a help in still even in 15-team mixed for the price. Ruve?
And I think he's going to get a very consistent and heavy amount of playing time. And that's what you want late in the draft. You want the playing time. You look at that lineup. If the Cardinals trade Nolan Arenado, I mean that lineup: Mason Wynn, Burleson, Wilson Contreras, Donovan. Trading Arenado, you got Newt Bar, Jordan Walker, Ivan Herrera, and Victor Scott. This is a team that does not look like they're getting or going to come close to winning the division. I'll tell you that much anymore. So this is a team that he's going to get a lot of playing time. I think if you need a middle infield guy, a $1, late or in an auction you want a late guy, a $1 middle infielder who's going to get a ton of playing time. This is perfect, especially if you don't feel that comfortable with your middle infield guys that you have already. If they're injury risk, this is the guy to have as insurance. It's perfect.
All right. Any last thoughts, Mike, or do you have anything else about a different middle infielder that we didn't talk about?
No, not really. I think that pretty much covers it. The one guy I think I'll mention since you gave me the floor, and I think I alluded to him before. I would advise to stay away from Zach Geloff. He even at his price, maybe in a 10 or 12 team, you take him and you move on early, but that strikeout rate is just really prohibitively bad. He had the worst contact rate in terms of of contact in the zone. I actually would like him a little bit better. Like if he had problems with contact outside of the zone, I feel like that's something like trainable, where it's like don't swing at bad pitches, better pitch selection. If you're missing in the zone, unless you're like an Aaron Judge or like an elite top of the pops power hitter, it's just generally a big problem. Like my summary on him, and it's not even really a comp. Like he gives me Keston Euro vibes. Like I just really am nervous about that Zach Geloff sticking this year.
Yep. All right. Ruvain, injury time.
All right, so I'm going to start with the new Rays middle infielder, and that's Haesung Kim. He's hoping for a mid-April return because he did have shoulder surgery in October, so he will probably miss at least a couple weeks in the season. So if you do draft him, make sure your at-bats are scheduled accordingly. Another guy who's injured, and this is a Met. This was last year. Ronnie Mauricio, who is a sleeper in a lot, and people don't forget about him because he's now behind a whole bunch of other people. But he had knee surgery, and he started doing baseball activity only this past December. He had 2 knee surgeries. His rehab is coming fine, but they don't know when he's going to be available. But they also said that if healthy, he could compete for the third base job. So that's just a name to keep your eye on. Rangers, Corey Seager. He had surgery for a sports hernia back in September. He's been resting, rehabbing for after the surgery. This was back in September. He had the surgery, and he's expected to be 100% at spring training. So you don't have to take anything off for that. We mentioned about Zach Neto already. He had the right shoulder surgery. And the question is what exactly the surgery was. Probably when spring training starts, we'll have a better idea. Mike, you mentioned Nico Horner. Opening day status is uncertain because he dealt with a whole bunch of issues. He actually, at a fan event over this offseason, he said that he dealt with a flexor tendon issue throughout the entire 2024 season, and he had surgery and to have it repaired. So we don't know how long he's going to be out for. They said that he'll probably will not be ready for the opening games in Japan, but he may be ready by Arizona for their opening day on March 27th. Another guy to watch for is Jonathan India. He was traded to the Royals from the Reds. When he was traded, he had surgery a couple of months before. He had surgery back in October to clean up his ankle. So that's something to just keep an eye on. And all these guys, whenever I mention any of these injured players, a lot of these injury updates, they're coming from either older reports or whatever I can gather. When it comes to spring training starts in about 10 to 15 days. When spring training starts and the players start coming in, you're going to have a better idea what's going on. So drafting now, if you see that an injury that could linger, just make sure to factor that into your evaluations of the player.
But do you have a Nico Horner update? Because I know he hasn't even gotten on to doing anything in the offseason.
No, well, that's what I just mentioned. They don't know if he's going to be ready. I haven't found anything else, and they're being very quiet about it. As of October 21st, this is what I was able to find, he hadn't begun throwing or hitting. So he had the surgery done on his right flexor tendon October 11th. So the recovery time for that could be about anywhere between 4 to 6 months, depending on the player. What's his name? Bryce Harper had it done. Reese Hoskins had it done. It took them about 4 to 6 months also to get back. So if he had it done in October, you're looking at maybe a mid-April, end of April return, beginning of May, that type of thing.
All right. Well, that's the end of our show. I want to thank Mike Gianella from Baseball Prospectus for coming on. Mike, what's going on with you? Where can we read your stuff and listen to you?
You can read me at Baseball Prospectus. I'm doing 2 columns a week right now. I'm doing a tiered ranking along with an ADP market review. You can find me and my partner John Hagland at Flags Fly Forever. That's our podcast. We definitely need to have you and Ruvain on someday. We owe you an appearance over there. And you can find me on Blue Sky at Mike Gianella.
All right, Ruvain, what about you?
You can follow me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come. You can also catch my weekly article with Rotoballer discussing all these injuries, Next Man Up, starting the end of March.
And I'm Ariel Cohen. You can see my stuff over at Fangraphs and Rotoballer. I'm on Twitter, X, at ATCNY. You can also follow ATC Projections on there for projections updates. And, of course, follow us at _shift_pod. You can follow our podcast on there as well. All right, once again, thank you so much to Mike Gianella for coming on today's show. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.